What's up, everybody? My name is Maddie, and I am a TikTok star.
I am Dave Movie Watching Merrill.
I'm Jeff, and I don't have a cool title.
But man, you picked some really good music to start this thing
my
off.
That's
gosh.
right. I picked this.
Well, actually, I picked it.
Maddie picked it.
But we are the hosts of Sleeping on Sunday, a podcast that is produced by The Gathering in St. Louis. This is our first episode, and we recognize today that this is dropping on Martin Luther King Day. And so we want to just offer you something that you can do today in order to celebrate that. So for me personally, I usually go back and reread Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail. And I want to encourage you to do that with me. So if you go to the caption in the description of the show, we've put a link where you can go and read that. And so you can spend some time doing that today and learning a little bit.
That's so cool.
That's awesome.
I'm going to join in that tradition.
Yeah.
That's really awesome.
It's great.
So we're here, guys.
We've made it.
We've made it.
Yes.
We just sat down and decided that we should make a show. For some reason, we thought it was important that our voice be heard among the millions of voices out there in the world. But we think that was actually like this niche, this space that we could uniquely sit in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of a gap in, at least for me, what I see as this like gap within like Christian content
Yeah.
that I feel like we have a heart to fill and a desire to kind of engage in a different kind of way.
Yeah, that kind of, it goes back to like why we called it Sleeping on Sunday, right?
Yeah,
And
which, can you explain that though? Because I wasn't here when we originally named this, as we are kind of like rebranding and relaunching the show.
Yeah, I think that's good. So Jeff, you'll have to help me on some of this. I know that we started because it like, we liked it because we're like, oh, Sleeping on Sunday is SOS. So SOS is like there's an alert, there's a call, something's got to change within the church. And then Sleeping on Sunday, newsflash, we all work in a church.
Yeah.
And so
We're here.
what we noticed,
Sundays.
the
There's not a
pandemic
lot
did
of
this thing
sleeping.
where it like expedited the number of people who were actually sleeping on Sunday, not coming to church, but finding their faith lives through other means, so through podcasts and through shows and through music and whatever it is. And so we just thought, man, it's really important for us to get our message out there in a new and fresh way for people to interact with their faith. But at the same time, a lot of people are sleeping on Sunday, not because they're not coming on Sunday, but because the church has kind of made a shift within culture lately, right? We can talk a little bit about that
Yeah.
Yep.
As it goes on. But
as it goes on, yeah.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's one of the things I'm kind of hopeful for in this. It's just finding a different way to talk church that feels relevant and applicable, you know, especially being someone like in my mid-20s. I feel like sometimes I walk into a church space and it feels really relevant, and sometimes I walk in and I'm not really sure how to apply it. I think this is going to be kind of a different environment.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think that for me, as someone in my mid-30s, my faith has evolved, you know, and so I don't necessarily have the same exact faith life that I had 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
A lot has changed in me, in my heart. And I think that's awesome, but I'm excited to talk a little bit about what that is as we move forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really healthy too. I think that's, I mean, we've said this before on a show, before, saying that like if your faith hasn't changed and the God that you believed in when you were 18 is the same that you got to believe in when you're at 40, that means you've completely understood God for a majority of your life, which is terrifying, at least to me.
Yeah.
It's terrifying to know like, oh, I understand the magnitude and the reach of God. So I think that's really cool that it's growing. But what's happened in culture that I think is fascinating, and I think it's justified, is that a lot of people have done the same thing. They've kind of ripped apart their faith. They've kind of, it's called deconstruction out there in the world, where like they're taking all these pieces and saying like, I'm going to break it down and no longer believe in it. The space that I think we can uniquely sit in and have conversations here on the show is that we can, I think that there's a healthy way for us to interact with culture and scripture and help people to rebuild, to help people find faith, not just in God again, but I think even in a version of church. I think there's a version of church out there that's actually a healthy version for them to make a foundation on, to keep believing and understanding and growing in God.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's a hard process, right? Like deconstructing isn't, I don't think, a choice that people really make lightly, right? Like that's a really hard thing to get to a place where you feel like you need to go through the process of unlearning these things that were really foundational to you as you were a child, or, you know, however you began to engage with them, and putting the pieces back together is that much harder, because then where do you start? Like you're losing all of the resources you were given to begin with. And so for me, like, I really hope this becomes a space for people who have done some of that work, you're kind of sitting with all these pieces and you're like, I don't know how this puzzle goes together. I could really use some help figuring it out.
Yeah. I personally, deconstruction is like a buzzword right now. People are saying it, but it's so important, like, to not write it off as something, because I didn't know that you could deconstruct. I thought that you just had to walk away from the faith. If you could no longer,
that's what it used to be called.
Yeah, it did kind of.
It used to be called.
You're not wrong. People, but that's not what it is. Like, it doesn't have to be.
I didn't realize that I had deconstructed my faith until after I had already done it. Like, it didn't become like a buzzword until I was like, oh, that's what I was doing. On my journey, it was more like me being completely unsure. Like, oh, am I allowed to do this? Yeah. Can I question God in this way, or can I have this insecurity about this, or can I believe this new thing? And am I two timing my faith? Like, I felt like dirty for having these thoughts, and I was like, I don't know if I'm allowed to feel like this. And so it was awesome to be part of a community, of the community that we're in, to have that space to be able to have those safely, and to work at a church and still be able to do it, and to come out on the other side much stronger in my faith. So.
Yeah, and so with Sleeping on Sunday and this kind of show as a whole, really our big goal is to find ways to help people navigate faith reconstruction by just presenting an alternative way of being the church, right? So for me, I feel like that looks like us kind of digging into these different topics and offering multiple ways of viewing them. I think it's not super valuable for us to come at anything from one angle and just kind of hand it to you as though this is what it is, right? Because we're all coming from different places. We're approaching different topics in different ways. But I think there's value to hearing 2-3 sides to a topic, having some open dialogue about what we believe, and then leaving room for you as the listener to kind of process what you believe on your own. And for us to be a resource to you as you do that.
Yeah, and I think along the way, if we can get really good at finding ways for us to engage with you all and hear your stories and invite other voices in. Because if we're real honest, we're not, I mean, if you're watching this, we're not the most diverse group of people ever to be seen. We're just diverse in age a little bit. So we want to do is we want to be mindful, we want to be respectful. We also want to do some learning along the way alongside of you. So we'd love for you guys to participate in the conversation and not just listen along. And then where we maybe step on some toes, bring it. Let us know. I would love for that to be part of the conversation, because that's how it goes down. Like, when we challenge each other in loving ways, I think that's the best thing that we could possibly do.
I mean, that's church, right? Like, it's having hard conversations with each other in a way that generates some helpful questions, in a way that pushes us to think a little bit more broadly, to see the world in a different kind of way. I think that that's huge, and it should be an all group effort to make that happen.
I'm really excited about it, guys.
I think it'd be cool to maybe just throw out a couple areas of things that they might be thinking, to think is this going to be a show for me? Am I going to connect with this? And I think the obvious one, at least in our context of our church, is if you've ever wondered about homosexuality and whether it's a sin or not. We happen to be part of a church where we don't believe that it's a sin. So that would be a topic where you're I'm wondering about that. I have questions about that. Or how do I interact with Scripture because of that statement? So things like that, or women in leadership, or whatever it is.
Or even down to fun stuff, right? Am I allowed to grab a beer with my friends and call myself a Christian?
Right.
Yes. What does Christian dating
look like? Can I get a tattoo?
Great question. Yes, that's great.
Can I get a tattoo? I said a curse word yesterday in my car. Am I in trouble?
Right. Yeah.
Even stuff like that, which feels like in this space, as people who are engaging in a different kind of context, is we have an opinion on what that is, but that's not the case for everyone. So creating some room to talk about it.
I love it, because I think that I have in the past gotten bored with my faith and kind of thought it was a drag, if I'm being honest. And so
we worked together through that. I mean, I didn't work with you, but I'm saying we actually worked in the same place. And I remember you going through that. It was tough. You have tattoos?
I have one
tattoo.
Yeah.
Maddie, you have a tattoo?
I've got a few.
I have 0. I'm such a
I really like tattoos.
Bland boy.
Gosh. Yes, you are. Just kidding. What I think it'd be cool to share some of our stories.
Yeah.
Tell how we ended up
how
here.
How did we end up here? Why are we at why are you sitting at this microphone right now?
Yeah.
And what we all talked about, how we deconstructed and how we got here.
Yeah.
I love that.
I think that's cool. Why don't you lead the way? Yeah, go ahead. Or you want to go?
I'll go first.
Yeah, you go.
Yeah, I love that.
I'll go first. Ladies first.
So that'll be in a different episode.
Yes.
chivalry.
That was a passive-aggressive comment to Dave to a joke he made earlier, which is why I'm inserting myself to go first. That is all.
I might have said something slightly inappropriate. Yeah.
So, for me, I grew up as kind of a from birth Methodist kid. I was baptized when I was like 3 months old in the family church. It was a whole thing. But then my family was kind of like a CEO family, Christmas, Easter, other major holidays. But I had a household that was always really intentionally affirming, and a mom who prioritized trying to find a way to make sure my sisters and I were exposed at least a little bit to other ways of life, because that was just different from her upbringing.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Kansas City area.
You're Midwestern. Okay.
Yeah. I was born in St. Louis, grew up in Kansas City. My mom's from Southern Missouri, so very, very Midwestern.
Okay.
And I got really lucky to be a part of a church that had, at least a church group that had affirming leaders and affirming beliefs. So my whole foundation for faith was kind of rooted in this idea that the love of Jesus was for everyone unconditionally. That was just the baseline standard. So when I got to college, I don't know if y'all have tried to participate in college ministries, but they're pretty much all the same. And it's exclusively very conservative evangelical theology within those ministries. And so that was all I had to choose from. And so I found a lot of really wonderful community in the group that I was a part of. I got to do a lot of leadership stuff. I learned a lot in what it looked like to kind of create a faith practice. And that was really great. But I did not vibe with the theology.
What ministry? I'm just curious. What ministry were you part of? Because I was also a part of
student mobilization.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I had a hard time with that, right? When you grow up in a space where, the affirmation was always the norm, I got to this place where people were telling me that was wrong, that, I was taught the wrong thing. And so I almost had this, regression in some ways where I was, afraid to lean on this thing that I had been told since I was a child was okay, because every person in my life that was a Christian at that moment was telling me that was the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that it was false teaching, and that I was hurting people. And man. It was this
painful,
emotionally tense spot. Yeah. And so finally I kind of got to this place where I was you know what, God, this doesn't feel like a good fit. I don't think it should be this hard. I'm just going to go home, work for my home church for a little bit, regroup over the summer, come back and see what happens. And when I made the choice to do that, literally within 3 hours of saying, I'm going to go home for the summer, I'm not going to do this for the summer, I was out of every group chat. I was kicked out of the Facebook group.
Oh, not because you left. You were removed.
I was removed from the group.
Gosh.
And that was awful. That was probably the hardest, first hardest spiritual moment that I've had, where I was what the heck? This is what I was taught growing up. I don't understand why I can't just still participate in this. But then I ended up getting connected back to that original space and was able to kind of find some footing and unpack what they were teaching me, kind of calibrate it with what I believe to be true and what I was taught from home, and find this kind of middle ground that worked for me. So for me, this conversation and the stuff that we're doing here matters, because when I look at that story, yes, it was really impactful for me, and it was one of the hardest things that I've gone through spiritually. And it's still so minor compared to the things that are said or the actions that are taken against the people that I know in my life, and other people who are then marginalized from faith spaces because of their very identity and not even just this thing that they believe to be true.
Yeah.
And so stuff like this matters, because I think we're creating room for people to explore new ways of thinking about their faith, seeing how it's relevant to them, seeing how they can love the people in their life more fully, but also just affirming that the table isn't just welcomed to all people, but it was genuinely made for you, right?
Yeah.
It was made for you to be here. And this conversation to me is pulling more chairs up to the table and showing people that the place is already set. You just got to come sit down.
That's right. It's always been fascinating, or not always been fascinating, since I've ever deconstructed, this idea that the synapses in your brain, how a thought or a belief forms, just because of something, how that forms.
Yeah.
You can be in or out. Just because I'm just thinking something. Like
Yeah.
I'm processing
Just
something
thinking
in my
the
brain,
wrong thing,
and I'm
Dave.
thinking the wrong thing, and so like it excludes you from participation in this thing with Jesus. And I was like, I don't get it. Like I don't vibe with that.
Yeah. So interesting how many people must not have very deep faith that Jesus or that God can handle our questions.
Right.
Like, why is that not a thing?
Or it
is a thing. That's the good news.
Yeah, it is a thing. And I think sometimes, at least what I've seen, is the questions are presented in this very like backhanded kind of way, or like rip the table out from under you kind of way, where it's like, yeah, bring your questions. It's okay to have them, but you give them entirely to God and then you never touch them again.
Right.
And when you give them to God, really, you're just like ignoring them. And God will just take care of it kind of thing. Which I think in some ways it stems from this like fear-based faith, where if you're afraid of God, then you're going to be like more rigorous in following God's commandments. But in some ways it's a little bit of a control space too, depending on the community that you're in, because when you have everyone doing the same thing, it's a little easier to keep things in line, and there's less bandwidth for someone to kind of call you on your stuff if we're all believing the same thing.
That's right. But I also, like, I sat, as you'll hear in my story in a minute, I sat in the environment long enough to like understand where the other side, I don't want to be sides, but where a more conservative side is coming from. Like, that's the environment. And I think, like, when you're saying it's like defensive, they're trying to defend the gospel, right? Like they're trying to defend this thing about Jesus. Like, they care for us in such a way that they're trying to present something to us. But my problem is that any time that someone came with a question, or when they invited someone into a conversation, they immediately had the right answer to deliver to them. And I was like, oh, this is not a processing thing. This is like a feed and swallow, like just like feed it to them, take it down, and like, this is where you're at. Versus like in my adulthood, I've been finding like, it's like, oh, like there is space. I had to wrestle through like, oh, there's space to think about this. I can turn my brain on for a second and think through all of these questions I have, and I'm not alone. Which is another thing that I think this show can do, and shows like it, is like it gives more spaces for people to be like, hey, you're not alone.
Yeah.
There are so many people out there who are asking these same questions, and it's okay. Like, we want to say it's okay, and you're welcome to be here in this space, and your questions are most certainly welcome along with the others. Mm-hmm. What about you, Jeff?
Well, I grew up in a church, man. I grew up church all my life. So a very small town Baptist church, and did music in the church the whole time. And then served in a worship team that traveled around for 2 summers.
Did you also grow up in the Midwest?
I did. I grew up in a little town in Illinois that's not close to anything. You know how you can say,
where was it? Where are you from?
Carrollton, Illinois.
Oh.
It's an hour and 15, hour and a half away from here. And this is the closest city. So I would be like, I'm from St. Louis, an hour and a half away from St. Louis.
Close enough.
It's cute. So anyway, and then, I traveled doing worship, and that was awesome. And, but I ended up at a church that, and Maddie, we've talked about this, that did street preaching.
Yeah, it did.
And so,
did it, or you did it?
I had to do it. I didn't, I was very encouraged to do it. So I went to the,
did you have a megaphone?
We had something like that.
I love it.
We went to, I went on 2 of these trips that did it. One of them was to Mardi Gras in New Orleans. And the other one was to the Indy 500. And it's so weird because the weirdest thing about it is we went down there and assumed everyone was a sinner, which, I mean, okay.
They are. And
Yeah.
But also what we assumed was everyone was not a non-believer or a non-Christian. And that's just not true, because Maddie, it's like a thing you guys do in your family, and Maddie's a pastor.
Yeah, it's like kind of funny. I feel like we have to have at least passed each other. My family goes to the Indy 500 every year. I've been to like 18 in my life.
Whoa.
It's a thing. I've been going since I was like a wee lass. But we see the group that you were with every year, and every year we walk by, and it's like, oh my gosh, if you only knew, you know. I kind of laughed at you doing that, but you saying it, this is God's honest truth right now. I think I did that, and I don't even realize I was doing it.
Yeah.
As you'll know, as part of my story, like I was just ignorant. Like I was down at in Florida, telling people about Jesus.
Yeah.
I don't think I realized it was street
like,
preaching.
I did the summer program in Gulf Shores where you pass out tracts every Saturday on the beach.
That was me.
Yeah.
Oh, you both did
I've
that?
done
That's
it.
Hilarious.
I've done the awkward thing where you go up to the same person 2 times.
Oh gosh.
2 Saturdays in a row and you don't remember their name. It's horrifying.
Fun story. So this is a fun story about that. This is kind of the opposite of that. But one time, but before I was in the whole Christian world, I was down in Florida for spring break, and I lost my friends, and I got drunk, and I fell asleep on the beach, like on the sand on the beach at night. And a Christian group took me in, like they carried me to their room. I woke up in this room full of people, like giving me water and taking care of me. I was freaked out, but they helped me find my friends. Anyway, it was really weird that one of these groups like picked up a kid and took him. I was like, that's kidnapping. It was really, really creepy, but it happened to me one time.
Well, it's an uncomfortable thing to, I was actually not comfortable the whole time I was doing that. It was really awkward and weird. And I'm like, why do we just assume that these people are bad people?
Right.
Weird. So weird. In fact, like I would like to go down to Mardi Gras. What am I going to say? Sounds like a fun time.
I don't like Florida.
It's New Orleans Mardi Gras.
Not Florida.
Oh, Mardi Gras. I was still on
you're
spring break. Sorry.
Yeah.
Mardi Gras.
And after that whole thing, I started to just like realize that I never had to think about like social justice, LGBTQ plus inclusion, or anything more than just like my normal straight white dude problems. Like
as much as it would interact your life.
Yeah.
With your life. That's naturally.
Right. Yeah. Which it barely did. I have a gay relative that we just didn't talk about the fact that they were gay the whole time. But I knew.
Right.
It was just never told or brought up. And so I ended up going through deconstruction and reconstruction. I started when I was on staff at what I would consider a problematic church. I realized that I needed to make a move. The Gathering was a church that my wife was working at, and I knew the stance on LGBTQ plus issues and some of the other social justice issues based on the fact that Pastor Matt was down in Ferguson, in the protests.
Yeah.
And when Michael Brown was shot. And I said, man, that's an interesting place. And so luckily my, who I am as a person and the gifts that I have seemed to, gel with the Gathering. And so I ended up working here and then going through deconstruction and reconstruction as a staff member of the Gathering. So while on staff at a church, I was okay to go through and be open about going through a deconstruction process.
Yeah.
And that's why I love this church. And that, that experience just led me to this podcast and to the subjects that we're going to be discussing.
Yeah. No, I love that because I think being in a community that can support you through that is like central to the whole process. Because deconstruction, reconstruction, or whatever language you want to use for it is not like a one-time thing either. Like it is.
No, it's an ongoing.
It is a never-ending just thing constantly. And so finding a space where you feel like held and supported and encouraged to do that is huge. It's, I would argue, like the bulk of the process.
Yeah.
It's huge. Also, it's not easy to find that community.
Yeah.
It really isn't for a lot of spaces.
Not.
Like I think we have a gym in this community that we have here in St. Louis.
Well, and that's what a big reason why so many people seem to worship with us online, because they cannot find a community like that in their vicinity.
Yeah.
Which sucks.
Yeah, it does suck for them.
Yeah. Dave, what about you? What's your story?
I don't think you've actually ever heard my story.
I haven't.
think Jeff has, but
It's been a while.
So I also, this is pretty diverse of us. I grew up in the Midwest. But no, I was an Air Force brat for the first part of my life. And so I traveled around all the way up until about 3rd grade. But from 3rd grade on, I was a Midwest kid. And so I grew up across the river over in Illinois near Jeff, O'Fallon, Illinois. And I grew up with 2 parents who, they never told me about Jesus directly. Faith was a thing in their life, but it wasn't like they sat me down and we read scripture and I knew stories or any of that stuff. They have a love and still have a love to this day, which I'm so grateful for, that I knew that there was something special about what they had. And so as part of that, like they would go to church on Sunday pretty routinely. And they chose a church. Jeff, you know this church. It's right there off the exit to Caseyville, but it's like a little church, that little like spaceship church.
It's a little weird.
It's bizarre. But I was the only kid at the church. The only kid at the church. And so there was no Sunday school. There was no like any activities or youth group or any of that stuff for me. My activity was with the pastor's husband. So I was introduced to women in leadership early. I didn't think anything of it. Yeah. But the pastor's husband would go out in the yard and we would kill moles together. He'd He'd give me a spoon.
What?
This is not a joke. Every Sunday, he'd give me a spoon. I would go dig a hole in a mole, like a mole row, and he would drop a pill in and I would cover it up. And every Sunday, that's what I did for a long, long time. And like I would just talk to this guy, George Stemler, rest in peace, George. He would just talk with me, and we just kind of be out there killing moles. And then later on, like I would get involved, like my parents sang in the choir with all these old people. I sang in the choir because what else was there to do at this church? And so I did that till I was about in junior high. And then I realized like, this is ridiculous. Like this is stupid. And I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like my friends don't have to do this. What am I doing? So then I leaned really hard into my friends, but then college came, and when I left my friends, like my identity was gone.
Yeah.
Cause like I leaned hard into friendship and like I'm doing all the typical high school stuff or whatever I wanted to do. And when I went to school, I really broke down. Like I drank myself out of my first school pretty much. And then my mom was like, hey, you just need to find a school where you know one person. So I switched schools, and the school I picked was the one school where I knew a girl who happened to be from the Baptist. She was one of my best friends. She was from the Baptist church in high school. And she was always kind of like that Baptist friend who was like always inviting, and it was always awkward. And sometimes I would go to church with her, and I was like, that's weird. I don't want to do it. But I went because I was like, she's my friend. She's got her life. And she's got something. And so I went. And then, so I went down to Southeast Missouri State, down in Cape Girardeau. Pretty liberal place. It's not, for those of you listening from afar. Yeah. And so my very first night there, it was Jerry Springer. It was my first night there. I was watching. That's right. So I was in the top bunk, and I was watching Jerry Springer, and there was no one else there because I moved in a day early, and I got a knock at the door, and this group from the Baptist Student Union showed up, and they were like Ann's friends. She wasn't there. It was just them. And they were like, hey, do you want to come hang out with us? And I kind of knew. I was like, no. I was like, I really appreciate that, but no. But anyway, they stuck it out, and they kept inviting me. And then a pretty girl said, hey, do you want to play sports with us? And I was like, yeah, dude. And so anyway, all that to say is like, that was my intro to faith, really. Like that was the first time I was like, okay, like there's these people who are guided by something. They sing weird songs and they raise their hands and they're really loud and they pray for a lot of people. But along the way, I followed a girl to an event called Young Christian Weekend down in Silver Dollar City.
Ooh.
And I was to be a chaperone for kids. I was like, I can keep them alive, but I'm not going to talk to them about Jesus. And so she was cool with that. But this guy presented the gospel, and he like carried a cross and built it and talked about it. And I was like, no one has ever said that to me.
Is that the Kanakuk guy?
It is Joe White.
I've
so
seen
like
that.
Joe White, I was there for that when he was doing that. And when he did it, like I somehow have this picture. I have a picture of me like in that moment receiving that message with just tears all over and these little high school students next to me. And so it was in that moment, like I was like, oh, faith became real. And so it was there, like that was my introduction. And I thought, oh, anything I receive at this point is what it is. Yeah. And so I have to tell all that to say is like, from that point on, the Baptist Student Union became my baseline for what faith was. Yeah. And so everything I learned there was, as you can imagine, more conservative than I am now. And that, I still have some of my best friends who are still down there, and they still part of the Baptist church down there. But after that, I realized like I want to go to seminary. So when I was there, I wanted to get in leadership so I can have an opportunity to get into seminary. And so they said, hey, why don't you be in charge of our outreach? I didn't even know what outreach was. Yeah. Guys, I for real, I didn't. And so like, oh, you just go around and you go knock on people's doors and you tell them about what you experienced in Jesus. Okay, I'm not like tooting my own horn. I was cool before this happened. When I started going around and doing this, and like I would knock on people's doors of people I kind of knew and like suite mates and roommates and stuff, and I'd tell them like, hey, this thing happened to me. Like they quickly isolated me. And I was like, oh, I'm not part of this crew. I'm not part of this tribe anymore. Like everyone that I talked to, all my frat friends and my sorority friends, they were like, no, something's up. Something's weird. And I was like, but this is what I'm supposed to do. Like this is what I'm supposed to be doing these actions because that's what you do when you follow Jesus. And it's life-changing and all that. And so then I went to seminary, and I went to a rather conservative seminary as well. Kept on throwing on like all this theology that I had the privilege, like you, Jeff, to never question. Yeah, I just accepted, and I was like, okay, this is faith. This is faith. Tell people about this. They need to be saved. And it wasn't until like I was working at a church in Texas. My first job at a seminary. It was what they would call a mega church, where I really started to like question things. My wife and I, we found out that we were pregnant, and we're like, is this the environment that we want to raise our kids in? And it wasn't until we had to ask that question. It was like, is there any baggage that we want to be carrying in of this lifestyle, this man-made community, and this really beautiful big church that like you're basically a number in? Is this what we want? And so we're like, no. And just on a whim, we moved back to St. Louis because I found a job as the college pastor at a church called The Gathering, which I knew nothing about. And my very first student, this is where it gets real. My very first student, you know who he is. Yep. Shout out to you, young man, if you're listening and you know who you are. But he was part of the LGBT community, and I had no idea what to do.
Yeah.
Because he was super smart, and I'm really glad he was, and he grilled me to death. I mean, we had lunch after lunch after lunch asking me questions about like my flawed theology and how privileged I was, and I had never heard these words before, and I was like, what are you talking about? Like, and yet no one else in the church was like questioning it, and I was like going home at night being to my wife like, what do I do? And then later on, some of our dear friends, Jeff, like they asked me to perform their marriage. Yeah. And they're a lesbian couple. And I was like, can I even do that? I don't know if I can do that. And so it was through being part of this community where I really like for the first time had to interact. And it's too late in life. I hate that. But it's not too late for anybody out there listening. You know, I'm 40 now, but like for you to interact with this thing of like, oh, there's a different way. There's a different way to think. And if you've ever thought like, man, what I think in my head versus what I think in Scripture, what it sees in Scripture, like they don't match up. And the way in my head seems more loving, that's a cue to be thinking, be thinking a little bit about what you believe and then start questioning and saying like, hey, maybe I've just interpreted things wrong. Yeah. Yeah. Because what happened was when I started realizing this, it caused me to re-identify with how I interpreted Scripture. I had to go back and read those verses again and be like, oh, well, maybe word for word ain't the way to go. Yep. You know, maybe there's a bigger narrative here. And so that, that caused me to start thinking about all the things. Women in leadership coming from the Baptist church, that was new. I was like, oh, okay, I guess that's not an issue. Yeah. And then seeing the whole Scripture as a whole narrative versus like story by story was really important for me. So that's what led me here. Yeah. I always love hearing people's stories because there's always something in it that you're like, oh my gosh, yes. I had the same experience when I was in college where I like got there and I made all these friends and I like joined a sorority and I had my friends that were in the sororities and the fraternities and were doing things and it was great. And then I had this like 1 year that they so lovingly call my gap year. Yeah. Where they were just like, you were kind of weird, but we just kept inviting you back because they were almost doing what I thought I was doing for them. Where it was like, if we just keep inviting her, maybe she'll mellow out kind of energy. And I officiated the wedding of my best friend last summer, and he says this all the time. He was like, you had 1 year, and we gave you a year to figure it out. You didn't even know you were on the clock? No. No, it didn't. And he was so great about it. And then we kind of got to the end of that space, and it was kind of eye-opening for me, I think, even there as well. Just to think about how I was being perceived by other people and the way that wasn't what I thought I was doing. And yet the impact, even though it didn't align with my intent, was significant in some way. And it gave off a message. It just wasn't what I thought it was going to be. Yeah. Yeah. You know, in college, I had friends, a group of Christian friends. And behind closed doors, we acted like normal people. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, but like we thought we had to do it in private. And when I say that, I just mean like we would have a beer. Yep. Or we would watch movies that were... I remember trying to go to friends' 21st birthday parties and doing a shot with them in the room before we left because Jesus went to parties to be present with people, but Jesus went to parties to set an example. That's right. Oh. It was a lot. I lived in a house. And we all invited, and we had our Christian club, and we played Mario Tennis and drank Dr. Pepper. Like that's what happened on the weekends, and we played wiffle ball, and like we had genuine fun. Like it was fun. Yeah. But like next door was the Pike House, and like we were like, ooh. Like it was like they were partying. And like we kept a distance. Like there was a road in between, and it was like very. Yeah. It's just crazy to like look at all of that and to know even here that there are common threads, and there's like gaps in what we're experiencing that maybe you've experienced, but that I'm sure someone else who is listening can relate to, and there is like an interconnectedness to it. Yep. And that is really important. Yeah, and what I'll say about for anyone who's like just beginning this journey or kind of in the middle of it. The thing I found is that on the other, there's no other side. When you have your first kind of like aha moment of like, oh, this is okay. it expands your understanding of God. It doesn't limit. You don't have to lose anything in Scripture. You don't have to sacrifice any of your beliefs or pieces of Scripture. You just come to understand and interpret it in a new way that no one has presented you before, because a majority of what's out there in faith and Christianity is rather conservative. Like that's the reality.
Yeah.
And exclusive. Like that's the other thing. Majority of it is exclusive. And that's what I love about,
that's a better word. I don't
I
take back the conservative thing, because there's conservatives in the gathering who flourish here.
Yeah, that's right. I think that the idea of including as many people as we possibly can is the most Christian thing I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to talking about how we can be more inclusive in general and what that looks like going forward.
I think so. I think a great place to start, right? So about in 2012 here at the gathering, Pastor Matt, our lead pastor, he preached a sermon called "The Birds, the Bees, and the Bible." If you're listening to this, you've probably seen the Birds, Bees, and Bible. It was a series all about sexuality. Yep. And on his third week of that sermon series, he preached one about homosexuality. And so that's where we're gonna start this thing, right? So in our first actual conversational episode, we're gonna start with addressing that topic of homosexuality. Yeah.
Yeah, and hopefully, I mean, we even recognize, and we'll talk about this in that episode too, that like when that episode came out, it was really significant, and it still is significant now, and there has been a lot of language that has been added to the conversation since it came out that we hope to expand upon as well as we talk about it.
2012 was 10 years ago. Yikes.
Right? So even just like figuring out how do we keep that conversation going? How do we create a space for people to learn something new? And just in general for people to hear a different way about talking about God.
Yeah, and it's a safe space. So, guys, I want you to know, like, if you're out there seeking it, it's safe. And if you're out there and you disagree, it's safe, and we invite that in. We just don't invite hate. That's the only thing that we're not going to invite, and we won't put up with. We'll just delete any hateful or hurtful comments, which is, that's not acceptable here. But everyone's invited in the conversation, and we'd love to hear what you got to say. Yeah.
And so, as we kind of get going, and as we get ready to roll this thing out, there are some logistics we want to run by you. Starting on February 7th, we're planning on having 2 episodes come out a month. We're shooting for the first and third Monday of every month. So if you're someone who likes to mark when your favorite shows are coming out, first and third Monday of every month.
Is that something you do?
Ideally. For the ones that I like, yeah. Oh, yeah. Because then you can kind of plan when you're going to listen to them and keep up with it.
I'm always just pleasantly surprised when I turn it on, like, ooh, new show. Yeah. Click.
See, when I do that, then I'm behind like multiple episodes, and then I got to take the time to listen. It becomes a whole thing.
Just wait for a road trip.
Yes.
First and third Monday, starting on the 7th. And like we said, we're going to be talking about that Birds, Bees, in the Bible episode, but we're also going to be trying to find ways to include voices and stories. So one of the things that you can do is you can comment some of your story to us when that episode comes out if you want us to share it. You can also DM us on Instagram at Gathering Now. And share your story that way, and we can find a way to work that in if you feel comfortable as a part of participating in the conversation. You can also just go follow us on Instagram. We're going to be posting a lot of stuff. It's Gathering Now on Instagram. And we're going to be doing a giveaway soon, so you want to be following because you definitely want the information.
Love a giveaway.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody
Nice.
loves
Now,
a giveaway.
can I win this giveaway?
I mean, we cannot win the giveaway.
If we draw your name and give it to you, I
we're
think we lose
hosting
listeners.
the giveaway.
Well, that's fine, I guess.
But you can also follow us where you listen to your podcasts, leave us a review, and subscribe so you get notified in case you don't want to mark your calendar when the episodes come out.
Yeah. So, guys, we, the three of us, are extremely excited to have the show. We're not here to teach really anything. We're here just to dialogue, to learn alongside you, and to grow with you, and to invite you into this journey of reconstructing our faiths here on the show. So,
did you guys both go to seminary?
I am in seminary.
You're in seminary. You went to seminary.
I went to seminary, yeah.
And I'm normal. Okay. All right, we're good to go.
I got a degree in leadership. I didn't do that. Was one of the things I learned in seminary real quick. I was like, ooh, I do not want to be I've been fighting this for years. I do not want to be a pastor of a church. Yet my title here is online pastor. But anyway, that's just a technicality.
And I started with my MDiv and then switched to a social justice and ethics track, and we'll probably go back and finish my MDiv because I really like school. So
yeah, weirdo.
Lots of books.
Yeah, learning is great.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for listening.
End it with me saying learning is great.
Learning is great.
Learning is great.
Have a great week.
I am really excited. This is going to be awesome. We are so grateful that you have taken the time to listen, and man, this is going to be a fun journey together.
All right, friends. We'll see you in February.
Woo!
Bye.